Yeah, I'm gonna do a speed run. I've got the shotgun, I've got the jetpack. It's gonna be so easy. Crap. How about I make a diorama about Spelunky 2 to remember the suffering and have this thing on the shelf to never forget about it. Hello and welcome to my crafting place. I'm gonna pick up some clay here, the Fimo soft type, not the regular Fimo, which is hard. Well, actually I'm gonna pick up some old Fimo soft that I have here, which got all crumbly and hard, so I have to knead and soften out first. This is the equivalent of kneading and softening out a hard rock.
I believe the only way to make a Wendy's old-fashioned hamburger is to press the meat patty.
I then made a little bowl which serves as Anne's face and a tinier bowl that's gonna be her nose. I measured things out quite often just to make sure that the proportions were right. I then tried to add lips and a chin, which ultimately didn't really work out, so I kept them off. I decided I would just paint those features on. Then I realized the head has xenomorph-esque features to it, so it was cut in half and redone. I then went back to the whole lips and chin idea, but it didn't click, so again, I redid the whole thing until I was finally happy with it. I then rolled out some clay and made individual strands of hair, and I had to make a lot, because this woman is hairy. I then laid them out next to each other, forming a hairy wall of hair, cut it to size and grafted, because this is not Stan's crafting place, but rather Stan's grafting place. Yeah. I put it on her head. I then went snippy snappy cutty cutty and left her with a beautiful new haircut. I still had to refine it later by grafting more pieces of hair onto her until it looked pretty game accurate. Well, it's decent at least. I then went back to the whole lips and chin idea, and I also added cheeks, but it just didn't work. It's just not gonna happen, Stan, so I ungrafted those from her face. However, I still decided I would keep the chin. Now, with her head finished, I started working on her yellow hat. Or rather, the white hat for the moment. I always paint the stuff at the very end. I made a thin slab of clay the size of a single roll of adhesive tape, apparently. Put it on her head and then added two small bolts together, which would form the little mountain range she's got on the top of her head. I then tied that mountain range together with a strip of clay. I now put together the 1960s Chevy headlight she's got on top. It's just two small pieces of clay, one in the form of a brick, the other one in the form of a human blood cell. I then smoothed everything out as much as possible using one of the silicon tip tools and threw her into the pits of hell. I mean into the oven to bake her and save all of the progress that I've done already. But suddenly, something unexpected happened. Well, not really, I kinda saw it coming already. And it's that her nose fell off. Now, that's no big deal, I just super glued that thing right back on. I then went on to making her body. I simply put a thick disc on her, which would form the upper part of her body. I then put a little strip around her neck that would then become her gray jersey. Two small clay pillars formed her legs, and then two other small clay pillars formed her arms. Then I added more clay to the upper body and slowly started to shape it into her yellow jacket that she's wearing. I also started to refine and define and sharpen and improve all of the little details around her clothing to get her to be as game accurate as possible. No, at least so I think. I mean, it's pretty good, right? It's pretty good, gee. I'm gonna keep it as is.
Nice.
All good, except for the fact that I've forgotten to make her hands. I quickly put them together from two small slabs of clay. I also decided I would remake the shoes because they've gotten deformed in the air fryer that I'm using for baking these things. Oh, and here's exactly why you should never use an air fryer for these purposes. It has a fan right on top in there over the figure with blades that spin around and make everything down there go all over the place. It then makes them come out all mangled up unless you make sure you secure things tightly, which is exactly what I did not do. Now here's yet another issue, and it's that baking things too often makes them all crumbly. That's why after baking Anna again, part of the head fell off. I tried fixing it with glue, but it didn't work. I then decided to redo the whole head, and I also gave her a new lamp, which actually looked way better this time around.
It's time to change your bulb to Philips.
I then baked her again, and things came out really good. Now, finally that she was done, I started working on the shooting arrow trap, for which first I had to make a cube. Very quickly I realized that wasting this much clay on it wasn't an option given how expensive polymer clay actually really is. So I made a rough cube first from dense cardboard. It took a while to cut out all of these pieces given just how hard this cardboard really is. I glued them together and started putting clay on top of the cube and smoothing it all out. Eventually I was left with a nice base on which I could start adding clay on top and carving out all of the little details that I needed.
Sure, Sir Isaac Newton unraveled the mysteries of gravity, but could he have unraveled the mysteries of Rubik's Cube?
Now this took quite a while. I believe in real time it took me around 4 to maybe 6 hours to actually finish the cube. Somehow I didn't realize how long this would take, but I guess it makes sense. I mean, it's a cube, so it's 6 sides and 6 different reliefs that I had to make. Oh well. In essence, I was looking at a screenshot from the game and added small clay strips, trying to imitate the original sprite from the game. I then smoothed out the top of these snakes of clay and carved out more and more details. For the top part, I had to use my imagination.
Imagination!
And I ended up making something that played along okay with the rest of the design of the cube. Or at least so I think. I guess it's aight.
Not bad, not bad.
I then baked what I did, just so I wouldn't deform anything while working on the rest of the sides of the cube. Took it out of the air fryer, almost burned myself. Then used the power of imagination again to make the back and front of the cube. I also carved a small hole on the front of the cube, which I would then use to make a small cloud come out of it. This is to imitate a bit the cloud particle effect that pops out for a brief moment when this thing shoots at you and takes away 2 lives and most probably causes you to die over and over and over again. This freaking game, man. Now I quickly made the arrow that kills you. I snapped a toothpick in half, glued a piece of paper in there, cut it to size, and it was done. Now for the base, I thought I would make one from wood. I don't have any fancy tools and almost no experience at all working with wood, but I still went ahead because this is what clever and time-efficient people do. I decided I would cut out a bunch of equal tiny wood planks like these and screw them together. I had to take out the drill for this one at one point because the wood was way too hard to make it manually.
If you like working with your hands and being outdoors, then a career in the drilling industry may be the perfect fit for you.
Eventually I ended up with something that I was totally not happy with because of how unstable and wobbly this whole thing felt to me.
Well, the Weebles waddle, but they don't fall down. Romperoo makes Weeble toys.
So I set all of that aside for now and drowned my pain by working on the little dung beetle that you've probably barely noticed while playing the game and that I could have probably totally skipped, but I still decided to make because again this is what time-efficient and clever people do. The beetle was simply made by putting together a small and slightly bigger and longer ball, then putting all of that on one big ball. I then carved out all of the details and made the legs. It looked pretty good, but then again, the air fryer killed things using its insane wind power and deformed the big ball.
That is absolutely cursed! Yes! Yes!
I redid that ball, then before baking it, pressed the beetle against it, then baked it and glued the beetle and all of its legs on it. I then decided I would make the 2 birds that pop up over Anna after being hit. I made a ball roughly the size of her headlamp and gave it 2 thick lips that I then started to shape a beak out of, but the figure was deformed. So I made 2 small balls again and decided to bake them first before anything. Then I worked on the beak again and added wings and feet.
Nice birdie!
Now it was time to work on all of these stars and blood particles that appear for a brief moment when Anna is hit. Somehow these things feel more 2D than anything else to me in this game, so I made them from paper. And then I used my advanced artistic skills and copied them directly from the PC monitor. The blood particles were simply done using a school compass that I did not rob from my little sister because she's in her 20s and not at school anymore. I cut out all of that and ended up realizing I pretty much finished everything except for the base. I then felt the blessing from the heavens above and simply made the base using the same technique as I did with the cube before. I just cut it out from cardboard and glued it together with hot glue. I then put some wood filler on it and stippled it around to give it some basic texture. I set the thing aside and finally started painting things. I took out some black paint, some white paint, then realized I have gray paint and used that instead. I loaded it into the airbrush and painted the arrow trap block gray. I then put the dung beetle on a stick and made a delicious dung beetle lollipop.
Here at Chupa Chups, we rigorously test every stage of production to ensure all flavors are consistently perfect.
Painted it gray as well and set it aside to dry. Using the same dung beetle lollipop technique, I stuck 2 little wires into both birds and then stuck all of that into Anna's head.
It's alive! It's alive! It's alive! It's alive! It's alive!
I guess it's I then painted her pink. This is because I wanted to base coat her yellow, but yellow is a pain to work with and needs a million gazillion bazillion layers. Unless you base coat the target figure pink first, then the yellow won't need as many layers anymore. It also acquires some depth, which is quite nice. I now also painted the stars and blood particles in the airbrush booth. I stuck them on some double-sided tape, which wasn't the best idea because taking them off from this double-sided tape then became a big pain. I then painted both of them a bit more with some colored pencils to give them more depth. The ones I used, by the way, were these polychrome artist grade ones, which are softer and better pigmented. That makes adding shadows like here much easier. They also look way better than just regular pencils, and they're also pretty gosh darn pricey.
No, God! No, God, please, no! 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 No!
Now I went back to the arrow trap and started painting all of the highlights on it. This took several layers of a lighter gray color to finish. Once the initial layers of gray were done, I mixed more white paint into my palette and added more and more highlights to it in the areas where I thought the light would hit it, if the light source was coming from above the figure. Then I also made a wash by mixing some black paint with a lot of water and some dish soap. The dish soap is necessary to break up the surface tension and make the paint flow much better onto all of the little crevices. It was also a pretty controlled wash. I didn't want to make it too watery. I ended up with a block that I was really happy with. This whole painting process went pretty smooth, but as always something gotta go wrong or this wouldn't be me. So when I started painting the dung beetle, I had the absolutely genius idea of painting it in the exact same gray color as the rock, which it didn't make any sense. And I ended up with a dung beetle that seemed to have been carved out of the same rock as the arrow trap. I also tried to cover it all up using some acrylic-based primer, but it looked really horrible and I was wasting a lot of time on it. But luckily, all of this is a really easy fix. I just took some lacquer paint, which, by the way, are the absolute nastiest type of paint you could possibly use for crafting. But despite being just pure cancer, they grip really well, they dry really fast, spray very smooth out of the airbrush, and they also have excellent coverage. So I painted the beetle in it, and I also covered the ball in brown acrylic paint. I then decided I would simply paint all of the lumpiness of the ball on, but it didn't look good enough to me. So I went back to the clay and added small balls onto this big ball, making it actually lumpy and smooth like it was before. I then baked it and painted on all of the details. This time around I used a dark blue color instead of the gray one to differentiate the beetle from the rock better. Also, it's kinda dark blue in the game, it's not really gray.
These guys are ambush predators. They just launch themselves onto their prey, hang onto it with their front legs, and just drive their fangs right into it. See how...
Now I painted Anna yellow, which thanks to the pink base coat from before was pretty quick and easy. God bless these pink base coats and primers, they make yellow much easier. I then started giving the birds some depth with a darker shade of yellow. I painted their beaks and feet orange, the inside of their mouth black. I then took some black paint on a toothpick and hesitated for quite a while before taking the courage to paint their eyes. Though then I swapped over to a regular brush because turns out the toothpick technique just wasn't really necessary here at all. I then took some gray, mixed it with water and some white and yellow paint, and started coating the headlamp she's got. I also mixed some light brown to paint this strip on her head. I started adding lighter and darker shades of gray and brown just like I did before with the arrow trap. I did the same thing with the yellow hat. This gives everything way more depth and makes it simply look chef's kiss awesome.
So good and tasty.
The only real problem with this is that it takes forever, and I really don't have all that much experience doing it, so it took even longer. I mainly learned the stuff from watching hours and hours upon hours of Warhammer mini painting videos. Those guys are the masters of this hand painting technique. Anywho, this is how she ended up looking for now. That's quite nice. I then took these two colors and mixed them up. This would then become the base coat for her face and hands. I then cleared that color up and started highlighting these flesh tones more and more. And since the paint takes a while to dry, I mixed some dark gray and painted her jersey and boots, and also added highlights and dark areas to her yellow jacket. I painted the fluffy neck part of her jacket white, and now since the paint on her face was fully dry, I mixed some pink into the flesh tone from before and painted her cheeks and nose. Now she looked like Clown. To get rid of that, I blended the pink parts with some of the flesh tone from before. Now, since I'm a pussy, I marked the features of her face with a pencil first, and only then I went over them with black paint. Once that black paint was dry, I erased any proof of my pussiness from before. Now the figure looked pretty solid, but since she is wearing brown pants and does not have yellow hair, I painted those parts brown. Again, I highlighted them like everything else. And this is the final result. I think she looked quite nice, though I had to remake the wires on the birds because of just how flimsy they suddenly became. And they became flimsy because while I was painting Anna, I was constantly pressing against these wires, so they lost some of that roughness they had before and became really soft. By now the brick was fully dry and looked like a European apartment wall, which apparently is
Raufasertapete
in Germany. To get rid of that texture, I slowly and painfully added one by one small rocks around its perimeter. I also placed some rocks in random places to further break up the
Raufasertapete
texture. Since I'm a genius and wanted for Anna to have a solid place to hold on to, I put a rock on her final resting place and pressed her feet into it. Once big, she would have a perfect small pedestal to stand on. I then took this delicious loaf of bread and baked it in the oven for 20 minutes at 100 degrees Celsius.
Dough pieces go into the prover, where they rise for an hour at 42 degrees centigrade.
And yes, I finally retired that air fryer, though the loaf of bread here would have actually been baked just fine in the air fryer as well. Tasty. And hot! I quickly painted it in some Australian sandy red color and added highlights and shadows by mixing white and black paint into it and spraying it on specific target areas. Basically where I thought light and shadow would naturally form if the light source was on top of this brick. I then painted the stripes that go across it. To finish things up, I gave the whole thing a very light dark brown wash and painted the final dark strip that's in the middle of the terrain in the game. Now, yellow didn't quite leave me alone, as I wanted to paint some of the golden nuggets that you can see everywhere in the game. I then dry brushed the whole thing with the mandatory rub from my girlfriend makeup brush. This time it actually wasn't rubbed, for once. This is my own. Quickly, I made a second coat of yellow on the gold nuggets and dry brushed some more. Now I mixed up some lighter yellow and painted over the nuggets again. While that was drying, I used a generous amount of CA glue on the arrow trap and put it on the terrain. I then drilled a hole using a pin vise, put some glue on the dung beetle and stuck him into the terrain. Quickly paint some more yellow here. Then try drilling through the pedestal that Anna is gonna go on, but that polymer clay rock decided to be just as hard as a real rock, so I had to take out the heavy-duty electric drill.
Everything I've ever built was because I had the power in the palm of my hands. Just like you.
After almost breaking the terrain base, I put Anna on a stick just like the dung beetle figure, put some glue on there and stuck her into the hole I drilled. Now I grabbed the diorama by the grey arrow trap and it came right off. To make sure this doesn't happen again, I drilled 5 holes into it, stuck some wire in there covered in CA glue, drilled holes into the base and fixed this grey brick that way. Quickly painted yellow coat number 1,000,000 on the nuggets and decided I would start gluing all of the particle effects on the diorama. I took a screenshot of Anna getting hit and imitated the position of the stars and the blood cells as close as possible. These weren't just glued on, but stuck into little cuts I made and then fixed in there with a small dab of CA glue. I now quickly painted the actual arrow, added yellow coat number 1,000,001 on the gold nuggets, and finally started adding shadows and lighter areas on them. It's what they call non-metallic metal in the Warhammer community, it seems. It looked pretty decent and definitely better and more game accurate than simply coating them in a single layer of gold paint. I glued on the arrow to Anna's body using some hot glue. That stuff is always so messy and lies somewhere in crafting hell for me, but then it's also really strong and dries really fast, which elevates it back to surface level. Now at this point pretty much everything was done and my crafting table here looked really messy, but a few things were still missing. This is the little cloud particle that pops up close to the arrow trap once that thing shoots you. I made it from a piece of polymer clay roughly shaped like the cloud that little Goku rides on.
Come to me, flying Nimbus!
Wow! Do you mind if I have a taste?
You don't eat it, you little baboon!
I also added a few pieces of grass that I painted green and later on also highlighted a little bit. Now, since I didn't lose enough time on this diorama already, I decided I wasn't happy with Goku's cloud coming out of the arrow trap and made a new smoke effect by using simply a piece of cotton. I put it on a stick with the tip covered in white PVA glue. I then used some homebrew black paint and added a bit of depth to it. Then finally stuck it into it and the diorama was finished. That is, almost. You see, the acrylic paint I have dries slightly shiny or satin, and I wanted to get rid of that awkward shine it had. When looking at the diorama from certain angles, it was quite visible. So I took out some of the so-called mecha varnish from Vallejo in the matte variety and coated the whole diorama in it. That got rid of the shine and also hid a few of the brush strokes that were kinda visible here and there. And now it was finally time for the must-have fancy fashion glamour B-roll shots that I, just like every single crafting YouTuber out there, absolutely must have in its videos. Let's get a B-roll with some license-free music rolling. Now, if you enjoyed this video, please consider becoming a subscriber of the channel. I am planning to upload consistent videos just like this one about every 2 weeks, with the goal of making a fun hobby my full-time job. You can also donate to the channel using PayPal or by becoming a Patreon, so please make sure to check those options out. With all of that said, Have a good one and see you in the next crafting video. Bye!